Hello and welcome to another episode of the CUFI Weekly. And this week is the first time we're going to be starting a new segment, which we'll be doing periodically on the CUFI Weekly, to get a view from our nation's capital, a view from the Hill, so to speak. And I'll be speaking to the CUFI Action Fund's Senior Director of Public Policy and Strategy, Boris Zilberman. Boris will give us insights into what is happening in Washington, D.C. in regards to Israel, Middle East, and how it is impacting or being impacted by American policy. And I'm joined by Boris Zilberman. How's it going, Boris?
Hey, Kasim, thanks for having me on.
No, we're glad that you could make some time. So we're going to jump straight into this because there's so much going on, and we'd really appreciate your perspective on some of that. So, of course, we have the ceasefire, we've had the living hostages returned, but we've also had some violations of the ceasefire. And, even now, as we're recording this, Hamas is saying they're releasing another body or two bodies that they found. What are the prospects of the ceasefire actually holding, and what has been the talk about the ceasefire and it progressing in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As we're seeing, just today that Hamas announced they're going to repatriate two more bodies. At the same time, there was also, it looks like an IED attack near Khan Yunis with some IDF soldiers that have been injured. And so you have this kind of situation where it's fits and starts, right? It's holding, but it's clear that Hamas is going to attack the IDF and that the IDF is going to respond with the support of the administration. I think the Trump administration, especially President Trump himself, has been very vocal in what Hamas needs to do and supporting Israel in their, ability to retaliate to these kind of the really flagrant violations that we've
Right.
seen in some of these attacks. Um,
Just on that note, you did a reference to administration. What do you think, if anything, can be done about what Hamas are doing internally within Gaza? We've seen some horrific images, of course, of Hamas executing opponents. Is there anything that can be done to prevent that? Because again, Hamas agreed to the ceasefire, but in terms of implementation, you referenced attacks on IDF soldiers, the withholding of bodies. Is there anything that can be done about that particular issue?
Look, I think just as a lot of us have before the ceasefire was agreed to, that the future of the hostages kind of really runs through Ankara and Doha, Turkey and Qatar. And I think same for this, moving forward to get to actually phase two, where Hamas disarms and you know there's another authority that is brought in to run Gaza. Obviously, what we're seeing is Hamas is doing everything in their power to make sure that there's nobody around in Gaza that can pick up the reins. And the question, I think the million-dollar question here is how much of that is Qatar and Turkey totally fine with? With the release of especially the living hostages, the pressure on Turkey and Qatar kind of has gone away to a degree. And so are they kind of agreed to this with the understanding that we're never going to get to phase two? Our proxy, and Turkey and Qatar are the political and military kind of backers these days, almost more so than Iran, to Hamas. And so are they basically okay with us never getting to phase two? And really, are they kind of backpedaling on the actual implementation of the full deal, contrary to what President Trump has messaged? So I think a lot of the messaging and a lot of, if we're actually going to get to the finish line on this deal, runs again through Ankara and Doha to see if they can, if they will get their proxy to really lay down their arms and have this, multinational authority take over in Gaza.
So on that note, you brought up Doha and Ankara. So look, and you talked about it, both Qatar and Turkey in recent history, at least with Turkey, have not exactly been friendly to Israel, have been very friendly to Hamas. I mean, just a few days ago, it was reported that under Turkish pressure or Turkish insistence, Israel allowed families of, I believe it was the Ismail Haniyeh to go to Turkey. Look, to be very frank, how much can we really rely on these two countries? One, in terms of this agreement, and two, what does a Gaza look like with Qatar and Turkey are heavily involved in the possible reconstruction or the future of the territory?
Yeah, no, I don't think we can trust Turkey or Qatar as much as we can throw them, but at the same time, they're the ones within, uh, again, as I just stated, most of the operatives and political leaders of Hamas are based in these two countries. Turkey has, given passports to all the Hamas officials in their country. Again, a NATO member giving passports to terrorists. And so on. So we can't trust them. But at the same time, it's kind of the old adage of trust but verify. And I wouldn't trust, but we need to verify that the agreement that all these countries agreed to is carried out. And I think a lot also on Egypt, on Jordan, on the UAE, these other partners who are not direct backers of Hamas the way they are. And obviously, Egypt has a complicated relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, and what they haven't done to kind of secure the smuggling from the Sinai into Gaza and so on. But they all have a role to play. And I think what got us to this point is kind of the peace through strength, but strength and unity between Washington and Jerusalem. And as long as that continues, I think that's where I think we hopefully will see some progress where, again, Vice President Vance is in Israel right now, where you have this strength and unity, where there's not daylight between Jerusalem and Washington on these issues to push these countries forward. And again, and if not, with the clear backing of the U.S., that Hamas will be disarmed one way or another, basically. And so I think a lot of it, which way do these countries want this to go, or do they want some sort of settlement here for the long term that, again, opens up the broader region to some of these broader deals that the administration and, frankly, the Saudis want and other countries want as well to move beyond this conflict.
So there's two things I want to touch on. There's, of course, Vice President Vance's visit, and I'm going to come back to that. We talked about the wider region, and for me, there's two facets to that. What is the situation? What is the reception? How are we approaching as the Iranian regime called it, the axis of resistance? Syria is very different from how it was 2 years ago. Lebanon is very different. The Iranian regime is weakened. So on the one hand, what is the situation there? And on the other hand, Saudi Arabia, that is the normalization agreement that everyone is so desperate for various reasons because of Saudi Arabia's status in the Muslim world, the Sunni world. So how is that shaping out on both sides?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. And I think because of, for good reason, so much emphasis and attention has been paid to what's going on in Gaza. I think people are straying from paying attention to what's happening in Lebanon. We're talking about disarming. Hezbollah, is not disarming. There's, the administration has gotten pretty frustrated with their own government, who, as in kind of Lebanese tradition, talks the talk, but never really does anything to disarm Hezbollah. And you see Israel continue to basically do the job for their own government of disarming through the Israeli Air Force, Hezbollah's military stocks and so on. So that looks to be continuing. Hezbollah has been seriously degraded through Israeli operations. And so I think that may be the status quo where Aoun, maybe make some perfunctory statements, but realizes that the Israelis are basically doing the job that he doesn't want to do, that he's told the West that he's going to do, to basically take up this amazing opportunity that the Israelis have given them, where kind of the shackles of kind of the Shia Iranian axis have been kind of thrown off. Or are they going to let it? Are they going to let Hezbollah and kind of the Iranian influence kind of creep back in? Outstanding, that's kind of we'll see. But I think the Israelis have changed the paradigm to a point where they're not going to allow that to happen. Syria is a bigger question. I think something that's been people in DC have been really wrestling with too is obviously Jolani or Shara, however people want to
whatever he's going by these days.
Whatever he's going by this week. Formerly designated Al-Qaeda terrorist. There's question marks about what kind of Syria he's going to build. Obviously, there's talks going on between Syrian leadership and the Israelis and Ron Dermer, and so on. But there's kind of questions on our end, on America's end of, and this is what Capitol Hill and policymakers are trying to figure out as they go through the National Defense Authorization process. Um, do we just lift all U.S. sanctions on Syria, or do we tie some of this to ensure that, hey, you don't kill your Druze minority or your Christian minority, that you kind of uphold some of these things that you've said, that you're going to build, that you're not building a Syria that's just, it's going to be similar to what we've seen before. We're just going to build another authoritarian state in Syria with Western backing, where the Russians are going to be doing a lot of the reconstruction. Jolani was just in Moscow, where they've basically said, you get to keep your bases, you get to keep all your economic deals. We're going to respect all the deals that the Assad government signed with Moscow. So that's, I think on a low simmer right now. There's not active conflict, but it's one of those things that if you're looking medium to long range, you're you're somewhat, I wouldn't even say cautiously optimistic, you're maybe cautiously pessimistic.
There are challenges.
There's
You could
challenges,
say.
challenges and opportunities, as people
There
like
we
to
go.
say.
Yeah.
And on Iran, I mean, that's, the IAEA just today or yesterday said that, they assessed that kind of the enriched, the nuclear, materials are still in those sites. They haven't
Yeah.
taken them out of the sites that the U.S. and the Israelis are able to destroy so effectively. But we've seen, satellite imagery of them, trying to do construction at some of these missile sites, nuclear sites, where they're, you see heavy equipment out doing work. So it's one of those things that I don't think, as the West, and I know the Israelis won't, but take their eye off the ball on the Iranians, that yes, they've been seriously, their nuclear program's taken a hit, but the problem is the aspirations are still there.
Right.
Even though the Israelis are taking out a lot of nuclear scientists, the knowledge is still there. You're still talking about technology that the U.S. and Soviets mastered in the 40s. So it's one of those things where, it's short of um, a new government, or a government that kind of disavows their nuclear program, you're going to have to deal with an Iranian regime that is going to seek nuclear weapons.
Right. So taking a bit of a turn, Vice President Vance is in Israel as we speak. Why now? What is the purpose of the visit? And reports have said it's linked to the ceasefire. So what do you know about that?
No, I mean, I think this is a kind of a big achievement. Obviously, I think where you see a lot of achievements from the administration, both last time around. I mean, I think worth noting President Trump's speech to the Knesset last weekend, which was kind of quite the scene and quite a moment for the administration. That's, going back to the first Trump administration, recognizing the Golan Heights as Israel, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the Abraham Accords. So this is kind of, building quite upon that with this deal, and again, like you said, potential for expansion of Abraham Accords. I think Vice President Vance has been sent out to the region, to make sure the ceasefire, this deal holds, that
Yeah.
is a kind of a legacy piece now for the administration. But then also to, this is a win. This is a good thing, that it's hard for any opponent of the administration to say this is bad,
Yeah.
right? Politically, domestically, though. So you want to take something good and build upon it. And I think it's, it's something that the Israelis, working with the vice president, and kind of get them more engaged in this, and have um, have some of that connective tissue on these issues, being on the ground there. It's not his first visit, obviously. He's been to the region, and both in as a political leader, but also in his military time in the Marine Corps. But really building upon that, and ensuring that the vice president has a kind of a role to play in these issues, I think is important, kind of long term.
Yeah.
Whatever happens politically here.
And finally, what do we need to be looking out for in DC? What issues can we see coming down the pipe in the coming months and weeks? What do we need to basically be on the lookout for?
Well, the government is still shut down.
There is that.
So, so the first thing is getting the government open at some point, and your guess is as good as mine at this point.
Yeah.
Some people are saying maybe Thanksgiving, maybe after Thanksgiving. So
Wow.
short of a soon breakthrough, things are not looking great on that front. So the outstanding things, obviously there's some elections next month that maybe that'll move some things along, but it's the big thing that's still out there is the National Defense Authorization Act, where you have a lot of kind of it's the defense policy bill. It's not the funding bill,
Yeah.
but it's the policy bill. There's a lot of good pro-Israel provisions in there supporting U.S.-Israel missile defense and so on. But there's some of these big question marks for the region as far as, are we gonna release the sanctions on Syria, and if so, how? Those are things that are going to be kind of closely watched and debated. That's going to impact Israel for sure, and how they kind of approach Syria and the region. And I think the big thing, obviously, that was announced today too, is the Saudi Crown Prince MBS is coming to DC to meet with the president November 18th, I believe. And so that'll be a big thing. I think they're looking for a similar deal that the Qataris got, not quite a full-on defense treaty, but a defense agreement. Obviously, I think the expansion of the Abraham Accords will be on the menu, and what do the Saudis really need, to move forward on the Palestinian issue, to get into the Abraham Accords. I think there's been a lot of reporting over the past couple of months that the Saudis and the Israelis are working quite closely on the strategic front. Can they take this to an open economic front at a cost that Israel is willing to pay on the Palestinian front? So that's the balance. I think that's going to be something before Thanksgiving. Folks are going to be watching very closely here in DC. That visit, the fact that they've announced it, almost a month out, I think builds to maybe some momentum if this deal can in Gaza can stay in place, and if there's some actual movement to a phase 2 implementation.
Boris, thank you so much for your time. We will have you back very soon. I'm sure, even with the shutdown, there'll be plenty to talk about.
Yes.
So yeah, take care, and we'll speak again to you soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Kasim. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Boris, for joining us on the CUFI Weekly, and we'll be sure to hear from Boris again in the very near future. Thank you very much for watching the CUFI Weekly. This is Kasim Hafeez for Christians United for Israel. Until next week, for Zion's sake, do not remain silent.
Thanks for checking out this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe so you get a notification every time a new episode hits. And if you want to check out some of our previous episodes, and we've got some really good ones, click on one of the thumbnails and that will take you right there. And finally, if you want to know more about CUFI and the work we do, go to cufi.org to check out all the resources we have available free to you.